In the winter of 1894, the most powerful man in England, Duke Alastair Blackwood, paid a fortune for a bride. He demanded perfection, obedience, grace, and silence. He chose Seraphina, the white swan of the Windermere family. But on the wedding night, as the candle flickered out, he didn't uncover a trembling, perfect wife. He found her twin sister Sylvia, the rebellious outcast who hated him. The world expected a scream, an annulment, or a murder. But when the Duke looked at the impostor in his bed, he didn't call the guards. He locked the door and smiled. This is the scandal they tried to bury. This is the story of the counterfeit Duchess. The Windermere estate was a crumbling monument to a fortune long since squandered. To the outside world, the Earl of Windermere, Lord Thomas Stirling, was still a man of consequence. But inside the draughty halls of Windermere Manor, the servants whispered about the mounting debts. The butcher hadn't been paid in 3 months, and the fine velvet drapes in the drawing-room were moth-eaten at the hems. Lord Thomas had only one asset left, valuable enough to save them from total ruin: his eldest daughter, Lady Seraphina. Seraphina was perfection personified. With hair like spun gold and eyes the color of a summer sky, she was the diamond of the season. She played the harp, spoke fluent French, and never ever raised her voice. She was the commodity the Earl needed to sell. And then there was Sylvia, born 12 minutes after Seraphina. Sylvia was the mirror image of her sister in features, but that was where the resemblance ended. Where Seraphina was gold, Sylvia was bronze. Where Seraphina was silence, Sylvia was a storm. Sylvia preferred riding astride to side-saddle read philosophy instead of poetry, and had a sharp tongue that had earned her the nickname the Wild Mare among the local gentry. While Seraphina was groomed to be a duchess, Sylvia was largely ignored, left to roam the moors and manage the failing accounts her father refused to look at. "It is done," Lord Thomas announced one rainy Tuesday evening, throwing a heavy parchment onto the dining table. The wax seal was black, the crest of the Blackwood family. Sylvia froze her fork, hovering over her meagre plate of roasted pheasant. Seraphina went pale. "The Duke of Blackwood?" Seraphina whispered, her voice trembling. "Father, they say he killed his first wife. They say he has a heart of stone. They say he is the richest man in Britain." Lord Thomas snapped, pouring himself a glass of wine he couldn't afford. "And he has offered a dowry that will clear our debts and restore this family to glory. You marry him in 3 days. 3 days, Sylvia interjected, her eyes narrowing. "That's barely enough time to stitch a dress, let alone prepare a life. Why the rush? Is he eager to acquire his new property, or is he hiding something?" "Be silent, Sylvia," her father roared. "This does not concern you. You will merely stand in the back and try not to embarrass us. Seraphina will be the Duchess of Blackwood. And you? Well, perhaps with the Blackwood connection we can find a widower desperate enough to take you." Seraphina burst into tears and fled the room. Sylvia glared at her father, then grabbed the letter. Duke Alastair Blackwood. The name alone sent a chill through London society. He was 32, brutally handsome, and terrifyingly cold. He rarely attended balls, and when he did, he stood in the shadows watching the dancers like a wolf watching sheep. He needed an heir, and he needed a hostess for Blackwood Hall. He didn't want a wife. He wanted an ornament. Sylvia went to find her sister. She found Serafina in the conservatory, weeping into a handkerchief. "I can't do it, Sylvia," Serafina sobbed. "I'm terrified of him. I saw him once at the opera. He looked at me as if I were a piece of meat he was inspecting for rot. And there's someone else." Sylvia's heart dropped. "Someone else, Serafina, please tell me you haven't been seeing that poet Arthur again." "We're in love," Serafina cried. "He's leaving for America tomorrow night. He wants me to go with him. We could be free, Sylvia. Free from father. Free from debts. Free from that monster Blackwood." "You can't," Sylvia said firmly, gripping her sister's shoulders. "If you run, father goes to debtor's prison. We lose the house. The tenants, old Mrs. Higgins, the stable master, they'll all be thrown out. You have a duty." Serafina wiped her eyes, her expression hardening in a way Sylvia had never seen before. "I have a duty to my soul, Sylvia. You're the strong one. You've always been the strong one. I'm just the pretty one." The next 48 hours were a blur of seamstresses and terror. The wedding dress arrived a monstrosity of white lace and pearls, costing more than the servants' maid in a year. On the morning of the wedding, a storm battered the coast. The wind howled against the windows of Windermere Manor. Sylvia woke early, a strange sense of dread settling in her stomach. She went to Serafina's room to wake her. The door was unlocked. The bed had not been slept in. On the pillow lay a note. "Forgive me. I choose love. Do not look for me." Sylvia stared at the paper, her blood turning to ice. She ran to the window. The carriage tracks in the mud were already filling with rain, but they led away from the manor toward the port. "Father is going to kill her," Sylvia whispered. Then a darker thought took hold. "No. The Duke will kill us all." She heard heavy footsteps in the hallway. Her father. He was coming to check on his investment. Panic sheer and primal seized Sylvia. If Lord Thomas found the room empty, he would send men to hunt Serafina down. He would drag her back in chains if he had to, or the Duke would withdraw his offer, and the family would be on the streets by nightfall. Sylvia looked in the mirror. She saw her own face, identical to Serafina's, save for the fire in her eyes and the sun-kissed tan on her skin from hours of riding. "Wash the tan off," she muttered to herself, her mind racing. "Powder. Lots of powder. Keep your head down. Don't speak." She didn't think. She didn't plan. She simply reacted. Sylvia stripped off her nightgown and pulled on the heavy, stiff wedding corset Serafina had left behind. When Lord Thomas burst into the room, Sylvia was standing by the window, her back to him, the veil already over her head. "Are you ready, girl?" he barked. Sylvia turned slowly. She kept her head bowed, shrinking her posture to mimic Serafina's timid stance. "Yes, father," she whispered, pitching her voice an octave higher. Lord Thomas grunted, not bothering to look closely. "Good. The carriage is waiting. Don't keep the Duke waiting." Sylvia's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She was walking to her own execution. She was going to marry the Devil of London, and he wouldn't know until it was too late. The journey to the cathedral was a funeral procession. The rain lashed against the carriage, drumming a rhythm of doom. Sylvia sat rigid, her hands clenched in her lap so tight her knuckles were white. Under the layers of silk and lace, she was sweating. "What am I doing?" she thought. "This is madness. This is fraud. When he finds out, He won't just annul the marriage. He'll have me arrested. But every time she thought of confessing, she pictured Serafina on a boat to America, smiling finally free. And she pictured her father broken and destitute. Sylvia had always been the protector. She would protect them one last time. The cathedral was cold, smelling of incense and damp stone. The pews were filled with the curious eyes of the aristocracy. They hadn't come to celebrate a union. They had come to see the beast claim his prize. Sylvia walked down the aisle on her father's arm. Her legs felt like lead. Through the thick lace of the veil, the world was a blur of candlelight and shadows. And there he was. Duke Alistair Blackwood stood at the altar, tall and imposing, in a black frock coat. He didn't turn to watch her approach. He stood with the stillness of a statue. It was only when she reached his side that he finally looked at her. Up close, he was even more intimidating. His eyes were dark, intelligent, and utterly devoid of warmth. A scar ran faintly through his left eyebrow, giving him a perpetually skeptical expression. "Who gives this woman?" the bishop intoned. "I do," Lord Thomas said, practically shoving Sylvia forward. Alistair took her hand. His grip was firm, his skin cool. Sylvia suppressed a shiver. As he held her hand, she felt his thumb brush over her callus, the mark of a woman who rode horses and gardened, not a lady who sat in parlours. Alistair paused. Sylvia stopped breathing. He knows. He felt the callus. The Duke turned his head slightly, his eyes boring into the veil. For a second, the silence in the cathedral was deafening. Then he simply squeezed her hand, harder, this time almost a warning, and turned back to the bishop. "Proceed," Alistair said. His voice was a deep baritone that vibrated in Sylvia's chest. The vows were spoken. Sylvia forced her voice to be soft and breathy, mimicking Serafina's cadence. She promised to obey. She promised to serve. Every word tasted like ash in her mouth. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the bishop declared. "You may kiss the bride." Alistair lifted the veil. Sylvia squeezed her eyes shut, afraid that if she looked him in the eye, the deception would shatter. She felt his breath on her face, smelling of sandalwood and expensive tobacco. His lips brushed hers, brief, dry, and perfunctory. It wasn't a kiss. It was a seal on a contract. As they walked back down the aisle, the heavy organ music swelling around them, Alistair leaned in close to her ear. "You are trembling, my dear," he murmured. "Save your fear. You will need it later." Sylvia's eyes snapped open, and she looked up at him. For the first time, she forgot to be Serafina. She glared at him with the defiance of Sylvia. Alistair saw it. He saw the flash of fire in her eyes. His step didn't falter, but a corner of his mouth twitched upward. The reception was a blur. Sylvia sat at the head table, barely touching her food. She watched the guests, the hypocrisy of the ton on full display. They toasted the couple while whispering behind their fans. "She looks pale." Lady Catherine, a renowned gossip, and a woman who had once tried to entrap the Duke herself, whispered loudly, "Do you think she knows about the Duke's peculiar appetites?" Sylvia gripped her goblet. "Peculiar appetites? Drink!" Alistair ordered quietly, sliding a glass of champagne toward her. "You look like you are about to faint. I detest fainting women." "I am not faint," Sylvia snapped, forgetting her high-pitched voice. She quickly corrected herself, clearing her throat. I am merely overwhelmed, Your Grace." Alistair studied her over the rim of his glass. "Overwhelmed. Interesting word choice. Most brides are overjoyed or terrified. You seem angry." "Is a wife not permitted to be angry?" Sylvia asked, testing the waters. "A wife is permitted whatever her husband allows," Alistair replied smoothly, "and I have little patience for temper tantrums." The carriage ride to Blackwood Hall took 3 hours. They travelled in silence. Alistair read documents by the light of a lantern, ignoring her completely. Sylvia watched the rain turn into snow as they climbed higher into the peaks where his estate lay. Blackwood Hall was a fortress of grey stone looming against the night sky. It looked less like a home and more like a prison. Servants lined the entrance hall. They bowed low, faces blank. "Take her Grace to the master suite," Alistair commanded the housekeeper. "Mrs. Graves, a woman with a face like a sour lemon. Prepare her for the night." He didn't say wedding night, just the night. Sylvia was led up a winding staircase down a corridor lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors who all seemed to be judging her. The master suite was enormous, dominated by a massive 4-poster bed draped in dark velvet. A fire roared in the grate, but the room felt cold. Mrs. Graves and 2 maids stripped Sylvia of her wedding dress. They scrubbed her skin until it was pink, brushed her hair until it crackled with static, and dressed her in a sheer nightgown that left nothing to the imagination. "His Grace will be with you shortly," Mrs. Graves said, extinguishing the main lamps and leaving only a single candle burning by the bedside. "Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not look him in the eye. And for heaven's sake, do not cry. The Duke hates the sound of weeping." The door clicked shut. Sylvia was alone. She paced the room, her bare feet sinking into the thick carpet. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a cold, hard reality. She was trapped in a room with a man she didn't know, a man rumored to be a monster, and she was about to commit the ultimate betrayal when he discovered she wasn't Serafina, the docile, perfect angel he had paid for. What would he do? She looked at the heavy brass poker by the fireplace. "If he tries to hurt me," she thought, grabbing the poker and weighing it in her hand, "I will not go down without a fight. I am Sylvia of Windermere, and I bow to no man." She heard the heavy tread of boots in the hallway. Sylvia quickly placed the poker back, though she kept it within reach. She scrambled into the massive bed, pulling the duvet up to her chin, her heart thundering against her ribs like a war drum. The doorknob turned. The door opened, and Duke Alistair Blackwood stepped inside. He had removed his coat and cravat. His white shirt was unbuttoned at the top, revealing a glimpse of dark skin. He looked tired, dangerous, and impossibly large in the confines of the room. He locked the door behind him. The click of the lock echoed like a gunshot. He turned to the bed. He didn't approach immediately. He walked to the side table, poured himself a glass of brandy, and took a slow sip, his eyes never leaving her face. "So," he said, his voice low and mocking, "the performance is over, is it?" Sylvia swallowed hard. I do not know what you mean, Your Grace." Alistair walked toward the bed. He stopped right at the edge, looking down at her. He reached out and grabbed her chin, tilting her face up to the candlelight. He studied her features with a forensic intensity, the shape of her nose, the curve of her jaw, the fire in her eyes. "You are very good," he whispered. "You have her face. You have her hair. You even have her scent." He let go of her chin and stepped back, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "But you made one mistake." "And what is that?" Sylvia breathed her defiance leaking through her fear. "Serafina has a small mole on her left earlobe," Alistair said calmly. I noticed it when I inspected her at the opera. You do not. Sylvia stopped breathing. Alistair took another sip of brandy. Tell me, little impostor, where is my wife, and who the hell are you? The silence in the room stretched so thin it threatened to snap. Sylvia sat frozen against the headboard, the velvet duvet clutched to her chest as if it were a shield. Alistair Blackwood stood at the foot of the bed, swirling the amber liquid in his glass, his expression unreadable. He knew. The game was over before it had even begun. Sylvia took a breath, letting the air fill her lungs. She let the terrified hunch of her shoulders drop. She lifted her chin, shedding the persona of the meek Serafina, like a heavy cloak. When she looked at him this time, her eyes were sharp, calculating, and entirely her own. "I am Sylvia," she said, her voice steady and low. "Serafina is gone. She left with a poet. If you want to arrest me, call the constable. But know that if you drag my family's name through the mud, you will be the duke who was duped by a girl in a corset." Alistair stared at her. For a long moment he said nothing. Then a sound rumbled in his chest. It grew louder, echoing off the stone walls. He was laughing. It wasn't a cruel laugh, nor was it manic. It was a genuine, rich sound of amusement, as if he had just heard the best joke of the century. He walked over to the fireplace, leaning his arm against the mantelpiece, shaking his head. "Sylvia." He tested the name, tasting it. "The twin. The wild mare. I believe they call you in the village. I prefer the one with a brain," Sylvia retorted, swinging her legs out of the bed. She grabbed her silk robe and wrapped it tightly around herself. She was done cowering. "So what will it be, Your Grace? An annulment? A public flogging?" Alistair turned to face her, the humour fading from his eyes replaced by a sharp, predatory interest. "You think I want Serafina, that trembling milk-water creature? I needed a Windermere. I needed the bloodline to secure a legacy and stop my vultures of relatives from challenging my claim to this estate. I picked Serafina because she was the eldest. I expected a life of utter boredom. I expected to spend my evenings listening to bad harp music and feigned agreement." He took a step closer, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "But instead I find a woman who dares to look me in the eye. A woman who plotted a fraud against the crown and the church to save her sister." He tilted his head. "You have fire, Sylvia. I like fire." Sylvia blinked, thrown off balance. You aren't angry." "Oh, I am furious," Alistair said softly, though his tone suggested otherwise. "I don't like being lied to, but I am also a businessman, and I see an opportunity." "What opportunity?" "My cousin Silas," Alistair said, spitting the name out like poison. "He is convinced I am incapable of maintaining a household. He is waiting for me. To fail for my wife to flee in terror, so he can petition the courts to declare me mentally unfit, a lingering rumour from my father's madness, and take control of the Blackwood fortune. If I annul this marriage, Silas wins. He will say I couldn't keep a wife for a single day." Alistair set his glass down. "So we stay married. You will be Serafina to the world. You will be the perfect duchess. You will host the parties, you will charm the investors, and you will help me crush Silas." Sylvia narrowed her eyes. "And in return," Alistair said, "I pay off your father's debts, all of them. I will even quietly fund your sister's new life in America, so she doesn't starve when her poet realizes he can't eat rhymes. And you get to live in luxury. You get freedom. As long as you play the role in public and private, you can be whoever you wish. You can ride red, manage the accounts if you're capable." I won't touch you. Not unless you ask. Sylvia felt a flush rise to her cheeks at the last comment, but she ignored it. She looked at the man before her. He wasn't the monster the gossips described. He was a strategist. He was a man under siege. And strangely, the idea of fighting a common enemy with him sounded far more appealing than dying of boredom as a spinster in her father's rotting house. I want control of the household budget, Sylvia demanded. If I am to run this house, I will not beg for coins. Alistair raised an eyebrow. Done. And I want access to the library. No restrictions. The library is yours. And, Sylvia hesitated, I want your word that you will never hurt me. Alistair's face softened, the first true crack in his armor. He stepped closer, reaching out to tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered on her jaw. I am many things, Sylvia, he whispered. Ruthless, cold, perhaps a little mad. But I do not hurt what is mine. And make no mistake as of tonight, you are mine. The air between them crackled with a sudden confusing electricity. Sylvia's breath hitched. Do we have a deal, Duchess? He asked. Sylvia straightened her spine. She extended her hand. We have a deal. Alistair took her hand and kissed the knuckles, his eyes never leaving hers. Then get some sleep. Tomorrow the wolves come to breakfast, and you will need all your strength to keep them from tearing you apart. He didn't sleep in the bed. He took a blanket and slept on the chaise lounge by the window, his back to her. Sylvia lay in the massive bed, listening to the wind howl outside. She wasn't Serafina anymore. She wasn't just Sylvia either. She was a player in a dangerous game, and she had just allied herself with the most dangerous piece on the board. The morning sun hit the grey stones of Blackwood Hall with little warmth. Sylvia woke before the maids arrived, her internal clock set by years of managing a farm. She glanced at the chaise lounge. It was empty. The blanket was folded neatly. Alistair was gone. She rose and washed her face in the basin. She looked at herself in the mirror. Serafina, she whispered. Soft eyes, gentle smile, head down. When the maids arrived, bustling in with trays of tea and hot water, they found the new Duchess sitting by the window reading a prayer book. Good morning, Your Grace. The young maid, a girl named Bessie, curtsied. His Grace requested your presence at breakfast. He said, not to keep the guests waiting. Guests? Sylvia asked, keeping her voice light and airy. I thought we were to be alone. It's Lord Silas, ma'am, Bessie said, her voice dropping to a whisper. And Lady Augusta. They arrived late last night to welcome you. Sylvia's stomach tightened. The wolves. She allowed the maids to dress her in a gown of pale blue velvet, high-necked and modest. She requested her hair be done in simple braids. She needed to look innocent, fragile, the perfect victim for whatever Silas had planned. When she descended the grand staircase, the house felt oppressive. The portraits seemed to sneer. The dining room was at the end of the long hall. She could hear voices, one deep and calm, the other shrill and demanding. Sylvia paused at the door, took a deep breath, and walked in. The dining room was vast, with a table long enough to seat 30. At one end sat Alistair reading a newspaper. To his right sat a woman who looked like a bird of prey, Lady Augusta. She wore black lace and an expression of permanent disapproval. Opposite her was a man who could only be Silas. He was younger than Alistair, handsome, in a slick, oily way, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Ah, the blushing bride emerges, Silas announced, standing up and spreading his arms. We feared Alistair had locked you in the tower already. Alistair didn't look up from his paper. Sit down, Silas. You're exhausting. Sylvia curtsied deeply. My apologies for the delay. I am not used to such a large house. I fear I lost my way. Charming. Lady Augusta sniffed, eyeing Sylvia's dress. Though that shade of blue is hardly in fashion this season. A bit provincial, isn't it? I find it brings out her eyes, Alistair said, finally lowering the paper. He looked at Sylvia. There was a secret glint in his gaze. Come, my dear. Sit by me. Sylvia took the seat beside him. A footman poured coffee. So, Silas said, leaning forward, his eyes dissecting her. Tell us, cousin-in-law, how do you find Blackwood Hall? A bit gloomy compared to the south, I imagine. Or is it just the company? It is magnificent, Sylvia said softly. And the Duke has been most welcoming. Welcoming? Silas laughed. Alistair, the man who threw his last valet out of a window. He was stealing silver, Alistair said calmly, buttering his toast. And it was the ground floor. Details? Silas waved a hand. I'm just warning you, my dear. This family has a history. The Blackwood madness. It skips a generation, they say. But Alistair, well, he has his moods. Sylvia saw Alistair's hand tighten on his knife. This was the bait. Silas was trying to provoke him to make him snap in front of his new wife. Sylvia placed her hand gently over Alistair's fist. The contact startled him. His muscles relaxed instantly under her touch. She turned to Silas, widening her eyes in feigned confusion. Madness! Oh Lord, Silas, surely you jest. My father always says that genius is often mistaken for madness by those who lack the capacity to understand it. Perhaps Alistair is simply too clever for ordinary conversation. The table went silent. Silas's smile faltered. He had expected her to be scared. He hadn't expected a philosophical riposte wrapped in sugar. Well, I suppose, Silas stammered. And as for the gloom, Sylvia continued, warming to the game. I find shadows quite comforting. They hide the dust, though I noticed the accounts ledgers in the library were covered in quite a bit of dust. I do hope the estate's finances aren't as neglected as the housekeeping. Lady Augusta dropped her fork. You have been in the library and looking at the ledgers. I was looking for a book of sonnets, Sylvia lied smoothly, but I stumbled upon the tenant records. It seems the yield from the north pasture is down 40% this year. A pity. Bad drainage, I suspect. Alistair choked on his coffee. He coughed to cover a laugh. Silas narrowed his eyes. You know about drainage, do you? A hobby? Sylvia smiled. My father enjoys agricultural theory. She felt Alistair's knee press against hers under the table. It was a gesture of solidarity. Good girl, the pressure seemed to say. Well, Silas said, his voice cold now. It seems we have a scholar in our midst. How tedious. I preferred your predecessor, Alistair. The first wife. She knew her place. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Alistair slowly placed his cup down. Do not speak of Eleanor. Why not? Silas sneered. She died in this house, in that very room upstairs. Some say she fell. Some say she was pushed. Sylvia felt Alistair vibrate with rage. This was the wound. This was the accusation that haunted him. Before Alistair could react, Sylvia spoke up. Her voice trembling slightly, a perfect performance of distress. "Oh, how tragic!" she cried, bringing a hand to her chest. "To lose a wife so young. It must be why Alistair is so protective, why he insists on checking the locks himself, why he is so careful." She turned to Silas, her eyes hardening just enough for him to see. "It is a sign of deep love, is it not, Silas? To grieve so profoundly. Unless you suggest that grief is a sign of weakness, in which case I pity your future wife." Silas stared at her. She had twisted his insinuation into a compliment of Alistair's character. "I have business in town," Silas muttered, standing up abruptly. "Come, mother." Lady Augusta glared at Sylvia. "You may have fooled my nephew with your pretty face, girl, but I see you. You are not as simple as you pretend." "Thank you, Lady Augusta." Sylvia beamed. "I shall take that as the highest compliment." As the door slammed shut behind them, Alistair exhaled a long breath. He turned to Sylvia, a look of genuine wonder on his face. "You," he said, "are dangerous." "I told you," Sylvia replied, buttering a scone. "I prefer the one with a brain. Now about that drainage in the north pasture. I wasn't lying. I saw the maps in the hall. You're losing money because the irrigation is blocked. If you let me hire a crew, I can fix it by spring." Alistair watched her. For years he had been alone in this house, fighting off the vultures surrounded by ghosts. He had expected a wife who would be a burden. Instead, sitting across from him, eating a scone with unladylike gusto, was a partner. "Do it," Alistair said. "Fix the pasture. Fix the house. Fix whatever you like." "And Silas?" Sylvia asked. "Silas will be back," Alistair said darkly. "And next time, he won't use words. He'll use something much sharper." Sylvia paused the knife in her hand, reflecting the morning light. "Then we had better be ready." The alliance was forged. But outside the window, in the shadow of the garden, a figure watched them. It was the stable master, a man loyal only to Silas. He watched the new Duchess, noting her confidence, noting the way she looked at the land. He took a notepad from his pocket and scribbled a note. "She is not Serafina. Serafina does not know oats from barley. Investigate the Windermere twins. The secret was already leaking, and the drama was just beginning." Winter descended upon the Blackwood estate with a vengeance. The moors were buried under 3 feet of snow, turning the world into a stark landscape of black rock and white powder. It had been 3 months since the wedding. In that time, the Duchess Serafina had become a legend in the county. The servants whispered not of her beauty, but of her steel. She had reorganized the kitchens, fired the corrupt steward, who had been skimming from the grain supplies, and most shockingly, had been seen in the library late at night, arguing over architectural blueprints with the Duke. They were a formidable team. In public, Alistair was the brooding, terrifying lord, and Sylvia was the graceful, softening influence. In private, they were partners in a war against bankruptcy and sabotage, but they were not yet lovers. There was a line drawn down the center of the master suite. Alistair slept on the chaise. Sylvia slept in the bed. They shared brandy by the fire. They shared secrets about the estate, but they never touched. The tension between them was a taut wire, humming with unspoken desire, but neither dared to cut it. Sylvia feared that if she gave him her body, she would lose the equal footing she had fought so hard to establish. Alistair feared that if he touched her, he would discover that he was indeed the monster the world claimed him to be. The fragile peace was shattered with the arrival of the great winter hunt. It was a tradition the Blackwood family could not ignore. The local gentry, including the hateful Silas and Lady Augusta, descended upon the hall, to hunt the wild stags that roamed the northern woods. "You must ride in the carriage," Alistair told Sylvia the morning of the hunt. He was fastening his leather gauntlets, looking every inch the predator. Serafina was terrified of horses. She once fainted because a pony looked at her sideways. "If you ride, they will know." Sylvia stood by the window watching the grooms prepare the horses. Her blood sang with the urge to be out there in the wind and the snow. "I cannot sit in a carriage for 4 hours, Alistair," she argued. "It's freezing. And besides, I'm bored." "Boredom is safer than the gallows," Alistair retorted. "Silas is watching. He has been writing letters to London. He is looking for proof. Do not give it to him." Sylvia sighed, conceding. "Very well. I shall be the delicate flower." The hunt began. Sylvia sat in the lead carriage wrapped in furs, Lady Augusta sitting opposite her like a vulture waiting for carrion. "It is strange," Augusta noted, her eyes sharp. "You used to vomit at the sight of blood, Serafina. Yet when the cook cut his hand yesterday, you stitched it up yourself without flinching." "Marriage has hardened me, Aunt," Sylvia replied coolly. "Alistair does not tolerate squeamishness." "Alistair," Augusta sneered. "He will tire of you, just as he tired of Eleanor." And then she drew a finger across her throat. Suddenly, a shout went up from the riders ahead. The carriage jolted to a halt. Sylvia looked out the window. Chaos had erupted near the tree line. A massive stag, cornered and desperate, had turned on the hunters. But it wasn't the stag that caused the panic. It was Alistair's horse. The black stallion, usually obedient, was rearing violently, frothing at the mouth. The saddle girth had snapped, sabotaged. Alistair was thrown, landing hard in the snow. The stallion, blind with panic, reared up its iron-shod hooves, aiming directly for the Duke's chest. The hunters froze. Silas sat on his mount, a cruel smile touching his lips. He was watching his cousin die. Sylvia didn't think. The instinct that had saved her family farm 12 times took over. She kicked the carriage door open. "Serafina, what are you doing?" Augusta shrieked. Sylvia ignored her. She gathered her heavy skirts in one hand and sprinted across the snow. She didn't run like a lady. She ran like a boy, fast and low. She reached the nearest rider, a young squire, paralyzed by fear. "Get down!" she roared, grabbing his leg and hauling him out of the saddle. She swung herself onto the horse's back. She didn't bother with the stirrups. She dug her heels in, urging the horse forward. "Hey!" she screamed, driving her mount directly between Alistair and the thrashing stallion. The stallion turned its fury on her. It lunged. Sylvia expertly wheeled her horse, using its shoulder to slam into the stallion's flank, knocking it off balance. She whistled a sharp, piercing sound she used to use to call the sheepdogs. The stallion froze, confused by the command. In that split second of silence, Sylvia leaped from her horse, landing beside Alistair. He was dazed blood trickling from his temple. "Can you stand?" she hissed, grabbing his collar. "Sylvia!" He groaned, his eyes unfocused. "Get up, damn you, before it tramples us both." She hauled him to his feet, just as the grooms finally rushed in to restrain the maddened horse. Silence descended on the clearing. Sylvia stood panting, her hair wild, her dress soaked in snow and mud. She was supporting the weight of the Duke, and every single member of the local aristocracy was staring at her. Silas rode forward, slow and deliberate. He looked at the cut girth on Alistair's saddle, then he looked at Sylvia. My, Silas drawled, his voice carrying over the wind. "I must say, cousin, I never knew the White Swan could ride like a Comanche warrior. And that whistle, very rustic. The trap had snapped shut. Seraphina Windermere could barely trot. This woman rode like a master. Alistair shook his head, clearing the fog. He saw the look on Silas's face. He realized instantly what had happened. He pulled away from Sylvia, standing on his own, swaying slightly. "My wife," Alistair boomed, his voice terrifyingly loud, "is full of surprises." "Surprises?" Silas laughed. "This is a miracle, or a lie. Tell me, Seraphina, where did you learn to check a stallion with your shoulder? Finishing school?" Sylvia's mouth went dry. She had no answer. "She learned it from me," Alistair lied. "You—" Silas scoffed. "You've been married 3 months." "And in those 3 months?" Alistair stepped forward, shielding Sylvia with his body. "I have taught her to be strong. I have taught her to survive. Because in this family, Silas, if you are weak, you are dead." Alistair walked up to Silas's horse and grabbed the bridle. "And looking at my cut saddle girth, I'd say the need for survival is greater than ever. If I find the man who touched my tack, I will hang him from the gates." Silas paled. The threat was real. "Get the Duchess a fresh horse," Alistair commanded the grooms. "She will ride back with me. The hunt is over." He lifted Sylvia onto his own spare mount. As he adjusted her stirrup, his hand brushed her calf. "You foolish, wonderful girl," he whispered, so only she could hear. "You just saved my life, and damned yourself." "I regret nothing," Sylvia whispered back. But as they rode back to the hall, Sylvia saw a figure standing at the edge of the woods, watching the procession. It wasn't a servant. It was an old man in a ragged coat leaning on a cane. Lord Thomas, her father. He had seen everything, and the look in his eyes wasn't pride. It was greed. The storm that night was biblical. Thunder shook the foundations of Blackwood Hall, but the storm inside the library was far more dangerous. Alistair was pacing a bandage wrapped around his head. Sylvia sat by the fire, her hands trembling as she held a cup of tea. "Silas knows," Alistair said. "He doesn't have proof yet, but he knows in his gut. He's going to dig until he finds the truth." "It's worse than that," Sylvia said quietly. "My father is here." Alistair stopped pacing. "Lord Thomas. I saw him in the woods. He's broke, Alistair. The dowry you paid. He gambled it away in 2 months. He's here for more. And now that he knows I'm playing the part successfully, he's going to bleed us dry." "Let him try," Alistair snarled. "I'll kill him." "You can't kill everyone," Sylvia cried, standing up. The cup rattled in its saucer. "Silas, my father, the servants who talk. Where does it end? We are building a life on quicksand." "Then we turn the quicksand to concrete," Alistair shouted back. He crossed the room and grabbed her shoulders. "I don't care about the scandal. I don't care about the title. I care about you." The confession hung in the air. Sylvia stared at him. You care about me." Alistair's face softened, the anger draining away to reveal a raw, aching vulnerability. "Do you think I let you run my estate because I'm lazy? Do you think I lie to my family because I'm bored? Sylvia, I have lived in darkness for 10 years. Since Eleanor died, I haven't felt a single spark of life. Until you. You walked into this house with your chin high and your eyes full of fire, and you woke me up." He brought his hand to her face, tracing the line of her cheekbone. "I don't want Seraphina," he whispered. I never did. I want the wild mare. I want the woman who rides into danger to save a man she barely knows. I know him, Sylvia said, her voice breaking. I know he is stubborn. I know he drinks his tea with too much sugar. I know he carries the weight of the world on his shoulders. She leaned into his touch. And I know I love him. Alistair made a sound, half-groan, half-sob, and crushed his mouth to hers. It wasn't like the wedding kiss. It was hungry, desperate, and possessive. He lifted her up, sitting her on the edge of the heavy oak desk, scattering papers and maps to the floor. Sylvia, he murmured against her neck. My Sylvia. That night there were no lines drawn in the bedroom. The storm raged outside, but inside in the heat of the firelight, the marriage was truly consummated. It was a union not of duty, but of passion. For the first time in her life, Sylvia wasn't the second best, the shadow, the spare. She was the only thing that mattered. As she lay in his arms afterwards, listening to his steady heartbeat, she felt safe. But safety is an illusion in a house built on secrets. The next morning, the sun broke through the clouds, illuminating the snow with a blinding brightness. Sylvia woke alone in the great bed. She stretched, smiling, reaching out for Alistair. He wasn't there. She heard voices downstairs, shouting. Sylvia threw on her robe and ran to the landing. The front doors of the hall were thrown wide open. The cold winter air blasted into the foyer. Alistair stood at the bottom of the stairs, still in his shirt and trousers, a pistol in his hand. He was aiming it at the door. Silas stood in the doorway, looking triumphant. He was flanked by 2 constables, and behind him, shivering in a thin cloak, held up by Lord Thomas, was a woman. She looked like a ghost. Her golden hair was matted, her skin grey, her eyes hollow and terrified. Sylvia froze on the stairs. She gripped the banister so hard, a fingernail snapped. It was Serafina. She hadn't gone to America. The poet had abandoned her in London, stealing her jewellery and leaving her penniless in a boarding house. Silas had found her. Put the gun down, Alistair, Silas crowed, stepping into the hall. The game is up. He pointed a gloved finger at Sylvia on the stairs. Arrest that woman, Silas commanded the constables. She is an impostor, a fraud, and she has seduced a peer of the realm under false pretenses. Alistair didn't lower the gun. If you take one step toward her, Silas, you will not live to see the trial. Alistair, stop! Sylvia screamed, running down the stairs. She couldn't let him commit murder, not for her. She reached the bottom of the stairs and threw herself between Alistair and the constables. She looked at her sister. Serafina, she whispered. Serafina looked up. There was no love in her eyes, only shame and a desperate, clawing need for survival. I am the Duchess, Serafina croaked, her voice raspy from sickness. She pointed a shaking finger at Sylvia. She locked me away. She stole my life. She forced me to run so she could take my place. Sylvia reeled back as if slapped. It was a lie. A monstrous, calculated lie. Her father must have coached her. If Serafina claimed she was the victim, she could be restored to her position, and Lord Thomas would get access to the Blackwood fortune again. If she admitted she ran away, she was ruined. Sylvia looked at her father. Lord Thomas avoided her gaze, staring at the floor. He had sold one daughter to the Duke. Now he was sacrificing the other to save himself. You hear that? Silas grinned. Kidnapping. Identity theft. Take her away." The constable stepped forward, handcuffs glinting in the light. "Ma'am, you have to come with us." Sylvia looked at Alistair. He was white with rage, his finger tightening on the trigger. "No," Alistair said. "She goes nowhere." "Alistair, please," Sylvia said, tears streaming down her face. "If you shoot, you hang, and then Silas wins everything. Don't let him win." She placed her hand over the barrel of the pistol and gently lowered it. "I will go," Sylvia said, turning to the constable. She held out her wrists. "But know this, Silas. I may leave in chains, but I leave as the woman who saved this house. You are just the rat scurrying in the walls." The constable clamped the irons onto her wrists. The cold metal bit into her skin. As they dragged her out into the snow, past her weeping, treacherous sister, and her cowardly father, Sylvia looked back. Alistair was standing in the doorway. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't fighting. He was watching her with a terrifying, icy calm. He mouthed 3 words to her. "I am coming." Then the doors slammed shut. The courtroom in London was suffocating, packed with the elite who had come to watch the imposter Duchess hang. Sylvia stood in the dock, pale but unbowed. Serafina sat in the witness box, sobbing into a lace handkerchief, spinning a tale of how Sylvia had drugged her and locked her in a cellar. Lord Thomas nodded solemnly beside her. Silas looked like a cat with a bowl of cream. "The evidence is damning," the judge declared, lifting his gavel. "Sylvia of Windermere, I find you." Bang! The courtroom doors didn't just open, they were kicked in. Duke Alistair Blackwood strode down the centre aisle. He looked like a god of vengeance. In his hand he held a crumpled piece of paper. "You have heard the lies," Alistair's voice boomed. "Now read the truth." He slammed the paper onto the judge's bench. The note Serafina wrote the night she ran away with her poet. "I choose love. Do not look for me." Serafina gasped, her face draining of colour. I never—" And Alistair turned to Lord Thomas. "You claim your daughter was stolen. Interesting, considering you accepted my second payment of £10,000 yesterday to testify against her. I have the bank receipt." The crowd erupted. Lord Thomas shrank into his seat. Silas tried to slip away, but the constables blocked the exit. "Case dismissed," the judge roared, disgusted. Alistair didn't wait for the formalities. He marched to the dock, took the keys from a trembling bailiff, and unlocked Sylvia's cuffs. She fell into his arms, burying her face in his coat. "I told you I was coming," he whispered into her hair. They didn't stay to see Serafina and Lord Thomas dragged away for perjury, nor to see Silas arrested for conspiracy. They walked out into the winter sun hand in hand. Back at Blackwood Hall, Sylvia finally took her place, not as a stand-in, but as the true mistress of the estate. They say the Duke never looked at another woman again, and that the wild mare and the wolf ruled the north with a love that became legend. And that is the story of how a counterfeit bride stole the heart of the most dangerous man in England. It turns out the wrong twin was the right one all along. Alistair didn't need a perfect statue. He needed a partner with for in her soul. What do you think? Would you have forgiven Serafina? Or did she get exactly what she deserved? And what about Alistair? Was he a hero, or just a man lucky enough to find Sylvia? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this tale of romance, revenge, and justice, please hit that like button, it really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a new story. We have plenty more scandals and secrets from history coming up next. Thanks for watching.